He honore, he korori ki te atua, he maungarongo ki te whenua, he whakaro pai ki ngā tangata katoa. Hanga e te atua, he ngā kauhu, ki roto ki tēnā mo mātou. Whakatongia tō wairua tapu, he awhina he tohu i a mātou, he ako hoki i ngā kupu, i roto i tēnei ātarangi. Amen.
Kia rangi nui e tui honei, kia papatua nuku e tākato nei. Ngā maunga, ngā awa, ngā taonga tapu o tēnei ao. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Tēnā ngā mihi te tukuna atu ki ngā mana whenua, te kapikapu tonu, i ngā ahi kāroa o ngā maunga whakahi i tāmaki makaurau. Tēnā koutou. Tēnei te mihi ki a koe e Samar, nau tō tātou hui e tuwhera, tēnā koe. Ki a koe noki e whaia Shirley mō tō karakia me o mihi tautoko a te pōnei. Kei te mihi hoki ki te kaupapa te pōnei. O te rā ki a koutou, te whānau whānui, te mātāwaka, kua taimai nei ki tēnei hui irirangi, tēnā koutou katoa. Ko ngā toki matawhārua te waka, ko Ngāpuhi, ko Ngāti Hine a Hine a Maru ngā iwi. Ko te ururoroi, ko te parawhau, ko te māhurihuri, ki whatitiri ngā maunga. Ko whatitiri te maunga, ko waipau te awa. Ko poroti te turanga waiwai. Ki te taha o tōku whaia, ko heta te whānau. Ki te taha o tōku mātua, ko Lensen te whānau. Ko iau Heta-Lensen taku ingoa. Nō tāmaki makaurau a hau. I whānau mai a hau kei Pātiki, ko o wairaka te maunga he ringa ki tāmaki makaurau. Ko te whau, ko te au ngā o ngā kuri o wairaka, ngā awa e rere ana ki raro i tēnei maunga. O wairaka e, te tahi maunga whakahirahira, i roto i tāmaki makaurau e. No reira e te whānau, ko au te maunga ko au. Ko au te whenua, ko te whenua ko au. Ti hei Māori ora. Whānau, part of my kaupapa for my kōrero tonight is to speak about the values and principles inherent in this discussion. And the first is a quintessential value in Te Ao Māori, and that is whanaungatanga. And I spent the first part of my kōrero with you explaining who I was and where I came from. It's something, whanaungatanga is something that I grew up with. It involves extending aroha and care for all people, not just my own. We care for taiao, the environment, in the same way. Our relationship with whenua is based on a relationship with the natural world that links us back to the very earth, to Papa Tuanuku, as our mother. She is, in the words of Whaiarangi Maria Rose Pere, hallowed ground, all of her. These understandings are so ingrained in us, and this knowledge is transmitted from one generation to the next. Our connections to Papa Tuanuku are affirmed through whanaungatanga. That is such a central concept for Māori. Matua Hare Williams, a kaumātua revered Māori elder, teaches that whanaungatanga relates to a pattern of right relationship between people, place, space, materials, and time. Enmeshed in whanaungatanga is the notion of manaaki. Manaaki is to care for, to protect. Whanaungatanga, a pattern of right relationship. Manaaki, care and protect. So I want to, in the spirit of whanaungatanga, I want to tell a story about about the migration of my whānau to Mount Talbot in the early 1940s. There was a war happening at that time, and my grandparents brought their 9 tamariki to live in Tāmaki Makaurau. My grandfather worked on a farm in May Road, and until the family could buy their house in Stewart Road in Mount Albert. There were only, they were the only Māori in the street when they moved in there, and it wasn't an easy time for them. No one would play with my mother and her brothers and sisters. The neighbours wouldn't talk to them. And a story that I remember was when one of my aunties fell madly in love with a local boy, someone actually came to their house and stood in front of the family home and yelled at her that she'd never be good enough. Happily, they married and had a beautiful life together. 2 people from Mount Albert, one Māori, one Pākehā. My mother married a Dutchman, and although we were raised in South Auckland as youngsters, our base was and is Wairaka. We returned there. Eventually, my parents moved back to Wairaka, and we still have our family home there. I've stayed in the shadow of Wairaka all my life. In time, I had my children, and I lived on the side of Wairaka for a number of years with my eldest boy, and then further down the hill with my second in the family home. As a beginning teacher, I taught in the bilingual unit at our local primary school. We took our tamariki up that maunga, and we taught them to name the surrounding maunga and moana. They climbed the trees up there. Whaiapola Harrison and I worked collaboratively and built up a strong base for the whānau unit there. One Māori, one Pākehā. I still frequent that maunga, although these days not as often as I should, and I might be able to come back to that. I watch the bird life that has become so prolific up there. Tui feed from the nectar of an assortment of trees, some Māori, some Pākehā. I step on that maunga and I greet Ruarangi. I greet Rakataura. I greet Wairaka, who have all left a legacy that is now written into the whakapapa of the maunga. I acknowledge their mauri. I acknowledge the impact on Papatuanuku as battles for authority over rich resources needed to build a life in Tāmaki Makaurau and prosper from the land ensued over a number of years, generations, centuries, greatly diminishing and altering the geographies of Wairaka, damage caused by Māori and Pākehā. I come to greet my tuakana, the trees, and I greet Tāne and the sacred pūriri to my right as I enter the maunga. I veer off to my left and walk on to the mighty gum trees that are part of the geography of Wairaka, sacred to the Aborigine people of Australia. I pay homage to all the sacred trees of the maunga, as do the birds and the insects. They have much to teach us about the care of Papatuanuku. They do not differentiate between Māori and Pākehā. To them, it is a food source. To them, it is shelter. Papatuanuku embraces all the trees that are there. They hold the soil together. Tāne allows the microcarpa to flourish alongside the tōtara. Some of his tamariki gorge on the blossoms of the wild cherry trees, while others flit and dart through the pūriri, tōtara, manuka, tikauka in search of more substantial meals of insects. After so many years of neglect, over-extraction and quarrying, the maunga has settled into a rhythm. There was a serenity up there. It has grounded me. I would often frequent the maunga and reconnect to my being as Māori. I would face the homelands and let the tears flow as I called to my grandmother and my mother, 2 strong Māori women who raised their moko in the shadow of Wairaka before making their spirit journey back to their own whenua and beyond. My wairua has been uplifted and restored by Wairaka all my life. As urban Māori, I've been able to ground myself in Tāmaki Makaurau through whakawhanaungatanga with my local maunga. Ko o Wairaka te maunga heringa ki Tāmaki Makaurau. I have lived alongside the Faux River most of my life as well. I can see it bending and meandering through and around the area from the top of the maunga, a major highway of my people. I know that my tupuna traversed it. It brings me comfort to know that. Whenever people come to stay with us, as soon as they arrive, we took them up the Maunga and we share stories with them. I know of this Maunga and I know of the Maunga, and I orientate them to Tāmaki Makaurau, pointing out where we are in relation to other Maunga and awa in the area. This is my connection to all Wairaka. I am urban Māori. My whenua lies to the north of the Maunga, but I know and I love the Maunga of Tāmaki Makaurau, its geographies and whakapapa, maybe even better than I know my own homelands. I didn't stop caring for Papa Tuanuku or relating to her just because I was disconnected from my own Maunga. We have a duty of kaitiakitanga for Papa Tuanuku, not just parts of her. O Wairaka, like most other Maunga in Tāmaki Makaurau, has been my playground, my teacher, my healer as a young Māori growing up in a city that tried so hard to invisibilize my language and my culture. Although I do have ties to Ngāti Whātua and Tainui, I'm not interested in making any claims about being mana whenua up here. I'm here to speak relationally about the Maunga and speak about the whanaungatanga that has been maintained between the Maunga and her residents, which include the rākau, the manu, the ngangara, even the wai, and of course, us, the people, ngā haue whā, ngā iwi o te motu. I honour the mana of the whenua. O Wairaka he maunga whakahirahira, he maunga kōrero. There are so many stories that mountain can tell. The indigenous rākau, yes, but all trees have got sovereignty and all trees are indigenous to somewhere. And I remember taking an Aboriginal professor who was visiting Unitec up to that Maunga. And when he saw the gum trees up there, he was very emotional, and he made me stop the car so he could do blessings to the tree. And he made me promise that I would go back there and visit those trees in honor of his tupuna for the sacredness that they carry. So in trying to understand how it's come to be that a council elected body is now making decisions about our community trees, claiming mana whenua status, claiming to be the voice of Māori, I've had to go on a bit of a massive journey. As I see it, Aotearoa is undergoing a paradigm shift and a devolution to a co-governance or to co-governance structures. There is confusion occurring all around. I personally believe the council and other delegated authorities and co-governance partners mandated by government have a duty of care to its communities. There are opportunities here to help to heal the relationships between Māori and Pākehā, of which I spoke when I spoke about what it was like for my mum when they came to Tāmaki Makaurau. And those tensions still lie under the surface. But everyone, well, at least in the government, is either selectively blind or suffering from some sort of cultural, whether it's amnesia or paralysis, I'm not sure, when it comes to how we are being taken on this journey of restoration. This needs restorative conversations. This needs resourcing, which includes kōrero and whanaungatanga, and time spent hearing everyone's community voice as part of their duty of care. I feel that council may have missed a vital opportunity to broker a closer connection and has been remiss in role modelling their own values. This has left me as a Māori in my local community with no voice and feeling as if I'm being colonised all over again. In relation to new authorities that have been established, I have heard and read about terms such as neo-Māori capitalism, co-governance, and I even heard co-governance described as apartheid by stealth in a recent Herald article I read. It concerns me that council may not be cognizant of what it might feel like for those of us who are bearing the brunt of that and who feel let down by both sides of the Crown's co-governance mechanisms. With all due respect, Tūpuna Maunga Authority is not mana whenua in the way I understand mana whenua. It is a board made up of representatives that include Māori and non-Māori councillors whose role it is to represent their community. Whether out of fear or not wishing to be labelled as racist, confusion, many people, tangata whenua and tangata tiriti, are afraid to speak up and voice their opinions, even about the felling of trees, let alone the renaming and gating of the maunga. I personally do believe it is right to respect our maunga. They are not recreational parks or quarries. As to renaming of all wairaka, well, I would feel a lot happier if I knew that Ngāti Awa had been involved in discussions about this, or even if I was able to understand how the government could elect a tendered board and how that board can have a mantle of mana whenua when some of the board are not even Māori, and how they can tell me as a Māori that I have no rights over the care of this maunga when I was born in the shadow of this maunga and have walked the maunga all my life. Tupuna Maunga Authority put out the slideshow. I found it when I was doing my Googling around. It was produced on May the 2nd, 2019. Slide 8 had a heading that was entitled Healing the Maunga. I think that's awesome. Slide 9's heading was Cultural Restoration, not Ecological Restoration. Now, there may be something bigger going on that I need to understand, that Tupuna Maunga Authority has the cultural restoration in hand and other bodies are taking care of the ecological side. I'm not sure. But Papa Tuanuku is the foundation of our existence. If we fail to care for the ecology of the maunga, then we are not healing her. Therefore, this project, these aims laid down are not and will not contribute to cultural restoration, at least not for me. To me, it tramples on the mana of our taonga tuku iho. All Papa Tuanuku tamariki have mauri. They have mana and they have wairua. This includes the trees. It includes the people. In closing, I want to say that this is an opportunity to do things differently, to develop Māori approaches that recenters community and honour the mana, mauri and wairua of all things. We are in unprecedented times. Our planet is in crisis. Papa Tuanuku is calling all her tamariki to help. Manaaki whenua, manaaki tangata, haere whakamua. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa.
Thank you, Yo. Thank you for the depth and the power of all that you shared and all that you bring, and the invitation for everybody who loves this space to understand these profound concepts much more deeply, deeply touched and deeply grateful. And at the beginning, just for those who joined a little bit later, we're touching on, you know, our relationships with the taiao, with the living world, in the context of the maunga tree issue, in the context of what started with us gathering at a wairaka in 2019 and forming relationships with each other because all of us got a call from the land, and is now growing. And a really powerful example of that is you, Shirley, is the work you're doing at Otahuhu Mount Richmond, starting your own movement, Respect Otahuhu, Respect Mount Richmond, where you're going through the same thing we've gone through in Wairaka in Mount Albert. So handing the space to you, my dear. Thank you both again. Oh,
Thank you, Samar.
there you are.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining Yo and I tonight, so as we can talk to you about what's happening on our mountains. I'm of Māori descent. I grew up in Auckland, but my father is from the far north. Ko taiao tuku maunga, ko awarua, tuku awa, ko ngā tuki matawha orua, tuku waka, ko te Rarawa tuku iwi, ko te uri o tai, tuku hapu. Even though I grew up in Auckland and didn't learn to speak Māori until my 50s, my father entrenched in us the Māori worldview, and much of my life is based on the Māori worldview, how I live. Mātauranga Māori is our worldview, quite different to the worldview of other cultures. And tikanga is the way we carry out things in the correct way. When my father died in 2006, it prompted me to go to university, to the University of Auckland, to find out who I am, ko wai o. And I studied Māori as my major, and I studied education as my minor. And I had the privilege of studying my Mātauranga Māori paper with Hine Sadler. So at the end of that paper, I think I had a more in-depth understanding of Mātauranga Māori, but it also affirmed to me that I actually already knew quite a lot anyway. My love of the environment is inside me, it's in my heart. And it's a love that if you're Māori, you know that it's actually not from the present time. It's a love that's passed down to us through the passages of time from our ancestors. I tuku iho, I tuku iho. And so because of those values, I have to stand up for the Maunga that stands in my local community, and I have to speak out on behalf of my local community to try and stop all of our trees from being chopped down. Mātauranga Māori, when it concerns the environment, we do not differentiate between native and exotic. We treat the environment as a whole, and we do that with the trees and we do that with the birds. And unfortunately, a new narrative has been created where native trees are supposedly better than exotic trees. And we're left with this dilemma of Te Puna Maunga Authority, who represent ngā mana whenua or Tamaki Makaurau, who have had all of the volcanic cones returned to them in 2014, deciding that they're going to chop down all of the exotics on our mountains. On our mountains, 75% of our tree canopy is exotic. And I would say that 75% of the birds that we have on the Maunga are native. And the native birds use the exotic trees all the time. Our Maunga is a nesting area for our native birds, both land and sea, because our corridor includes the Manukau Harbour, Mangere Mountain, which has already had 120 trees felled. Mount Smart, One Tree Hill, Maunga Kia, and Maunga Richmond. Our area, our local board area of Mangere Otahuhu is actually down to 8% tree canopy. It is the lowest tree canopy coverage in any local board area in Auckland. And this is why it perplexes me that Māori would think it's okay to actually take all these trees down. I have tried to interact with Te Maunga Authority, with our local board, and also the local board of Maunga, because even though Mount Richmond stands in our rohe, our area, it sits right on the boundary and is actually in the Maunga board. I've also tried to talk to mana whenua, te takitai o Waihua, mana whenua of our maunga. The maunga went back to them in the treaty settlement with 13 other iwi. But no one will come and walk with me at the park and talk to me about the community issues that we are really concerned about, our trees coming down in a clear fell. We've asked in a presentation last year by a council facility, I was able to present to Te Maunga Authority, and I asked them to wait for 60 years, which I think is really quite reasonable, before felling all of the exotic trees. And we've asked them to plant first and fell later. But the planting program will need a bit of revising, because they're actually not going to be planting very many trees at all. And they're also not going to be planting where they're felling the trees. We have had quite a lot of planting done already. And this all started for me mainly about the trees and the birds. But Te Maunga Authority have spread their wings, and they are also appearing to be working towards closing down our sport clubs, which are on the mountain. We have the Rugby League Club that's been there for, I think, about 110 years. And they've been given an ultimatum where they have to drop their liquor license, which is how I think they raise most of their funds before their lease can be renewed. The car club also feel very pressured that they're actually not really that welcome on the mountain anymore. Like our sporting clubs are under pressure as well. So I'm really wondering where this is going. The treaty settlement was signed by Ngā mana whenua or Tamaki Makaurau, not Te Maunga Authority, on the basis that these spaces were our parks and reserves. I know the Maunga have a lot of history, and I know that that history is very important to people that call the local Maungas concerned, their tūranga waiwai. But there are communities that live around these mountains as well. And, you know, we actually own properties here, and in our area, the mountain's actually the only place that we've got to go and walk in amongst trees. And it's the only place that our children have to go and walk in amongst trees. So the local club has actually lost the sport field, and that's where the planting's been done. The planting could have been done in lots of other places, but unfortunately they decided to take a sport field instead. So the first trees that were felled on our mountain were taken down in 2017. So I'm 4 years down the track now, trying to stop any more trees being felled. And the first lot of trees that came down was a cliff face, and it was covered in olive trees. Te Maunga Authority had reclassified those trees as pests, and that's why they were able to take them down. Our community got no notification whatsoever about that felling. We didn't have the courtesy of a sign put up. to let us know that they were coming. We just arrived one morning to find a lot of hurricane fencing up. So I actually had a number of a staffer for Te Ao Authority, and I contacted him via email asking him what was happening with the olive trees, because our ruru, our mōpork, were actually nesting in those trees at that time. And I didn't know on the day, but if native birds are nesting in trees, they can't be felled. But the staff of Te Ao Authority basically broke tikanga as far as being a Māori goes, because we would never interfere with the nesting of our native birds, because they're our kaitiaki. And as Māori, we need to perform kaitiaki-tanga to look after those things that are precious, and the birds are precious to us. But they also broke a Pakeha rule as well, because it's in the Parks and Reserves Act that you can't fell if there's any nesting going on in the trees. So I really feel like we're as a community, all our various communities, that we're stuck in the middle of this co-governance model, which I have read in the past was apparently a bit of a pilot model for Auckland. It's never really made any sense to many of us until He Puapua, the document He Puapua, was published recently. And one of the recommendations in He Puapua is that all Department of Conservation land is put into a co-governance with Māori, but Māori will be the sole decision makers of that co-governance. And that's what we're experiencing with this co-governance. We basically had our Prime Minister turn her back on us. We've had our Auckland Council turn their back on us. We have had our local boards turn their back on us. And we have had mana whenua turn their back on us. And I don't think it's a good role model if this is what we're going to be experiencing with other co-governances in education and health, in the judiciary, in every facet of life actually that is part of New Zealand society. We really need to get this right. And Yo and I have gone out on a bit of a limb tonight, actually, speaking about it, because the hierarchy in Māori society really prefers a man to be speaking of these things. It's not really for women to do that. But we don't have a Māori man that's willing to speak up for us at the moment. So we've had to come forward ourselves. And at Mount Richmond, we are preparing to go onto the mountain and occupy the mountain, because resource consent's just gone through to fell hundreds of trees. And the reason that we're doing that is because mana whenua aren't. And from a Māori perspective, I don't understand that, because I understand what mātauranga Māori is. And I understand that the mountain is our kaitiaki. I understand that the trees are our tuakana, and I understand that our native birds are very, very important, not only, you know, as a way of spreading seeds, but this environment is very important to our well-being. The mountains actually, they're kind of like our rock in our various communities, and they put the well-being back into our community. And I don't understand why Māori wanted to take that away. If the trees have felled at our mountain, you will take the mana, modi, and wairua from us. And if you say that by doing it, that you are putting the wairua and the mana back into the maunga, we need to find a compromise somewhere. Because it's just not tika. It's not tikanga. And I would like to see Māori start to act like Māori, please. I would like to see some kaitiakitanga. I would like to see some kindness to our communities. And I would like to see some kōrero, kanohi ki kanohi, face to face. The first time I asked Te Maunga Authority to come to the mountain at Mount Richmond to talk to our community was over walking our dogs. We had been very fortunate to be able to walk on the mountain for many years, some of us over 30 years, off leash, and we arrived one day to find a sign being erected. I seem to always be in the right place at the right time. I always seem to arrive when important things are happening there. And so I arrived the day the Te Maunga Authority crew came in as a group and put up their first signs. They were not friendly to me. They were not kind to me. They were actually rude to me. I did ask if there was any tangata whenua in the group, and there was, and he was lovely. Apparently it was his first day, so I had made his first day a wee bit difficult. But we had a bit of a kōrero, and they call themselves the kaitiaki, and I'll just use the name Tama for the staff that I talked to. And he said to me, you know that we're not the kaitiaki, the Maunga is the kaitiaki. And I said, yes, I do. And all the trees and the birds are the kaitiaki as well. So these new narratives that humans are kaitiaki are just incorrect, and they've been fed to our council in Auckland. They've been fed to our politicians, and to be quite frank, everyone's just been sucked in by it, because in our situation with the mountain and our trees being felled and the habitat of our native birds being destroyed is not tikanga. It's not mātauranga Māori. And the things that Te Maunga Authority are saying on behalf of ngā mana whenua are actually not correct. And I will be happy to have a conversation with anyone from Te Maunga Authority about that subject if they're willing to come and talk, but they never are. So I really feel like the treaty settlement at this point in time is a broken promise. We were promised as New Zealanders that when the Maunga were returned to Māori, nothing would change for us, that we would always have access to these green spaces, and that we would always be able to enjoy the activities that we've always enjoyed in those spaces. But that's not happening. And when we've tried to present to Te Maunga Authority, they won't even minute what we have to say. So I really feel quite strongly that it's time that we had some transparency with Te Maunga Authority, and it's time our council members who are on the Te Maunga Authority board step up and start talking, because a co-governance is not a co-governance when only half of it has a voice. The council and our local boards are there to advocate for us, and they are not doing that. I don't know why. I can only, guess. But it appears that you've been told by someone high up the chain not to have a voice, and that you are to leave the decision making purely to Te Maunga Authority. Well, the communities have not been included in that conversation. And we want the conversation. All our various communities, even the communities that have had their trees felled, want a conversation, because we're not happy with the planting replacement of all the trees that have come down. We're not happy with the loss of birds that we've experienced on our different mountains. And we're not happy about the sporting facilities that our children use being taken away, even though Te Maunga Authority has made it look like it's, the club's choice. I don't think the full story's been told.
Shirley, I think in this moment, thank you so much for all of that. It's so powerful. For those who are newer to this, to what you're sharing, it feels really important to elucidate what the Te Maunga Authority is, because there's kind of a story that, they own the mountain.
Right.
And to my understanding, in 2014, there was a treaty settlement where the Maunga were handed back in trust to be kept for all the people of Auckland to access, to 13 hapu and iwi. But the Te Maunga Authority was set up to administer the mountains, not own them, not act like they can barrel in and make all the decisions. And they're not all Māori, and they're not even all mana whenua, who are the Māori half of the Te Maunga Authority. So you both have woven and spoken to this at such a deep and precise level, but just even dialing back a little bit, going, wait a minute, like this, it's a colonial construct.
Can I just...
Yeah, go ahead.
Can I just come in there for a little minute? Is that all right? So you're absolutely right, Sam. I just checked that out on the website tonight. Auckland Council is responsible for the management of the Te Maunga under the direction of Te Maunga Authority. And its elect members, the council elect members, are there to represent community voice. So as a member of All Wairaka, I became involved because the voice of the local community wasn't being heard. And I remember when I first came on board, a lot of people think that there's a lot of Pākehā out there who are totally opposed to the concept of the re-indigenization of the Maunga. But my understanding has shifted now, because actually what I learned was many of the local residents went up to help with the first planting. They're not opposed to it at all. It's how it's being done. It's the clear felling of these trees, and you only need to look at Māngere, at the Maunga and what's happened on the side there to see what's going, you know, to see the results of that. And I just thought it would be nice also, when you're talking about colonial and decolonial things, I found a lovely little quote by Whaia Linda Tuhiwai Smith. There's a powerful literature about decolonial love, which highlights the importance of love as a counter to colonial violence. So we understand, I'm not saying that it isn't timely for these conversations to be occurring. I am, and that's the hard part for me, is it's a bittersweet, because it might seem good for Māori, it might seem fantastic, but the other thing that Whaia Linda Tuhiwai Smith talks about is for Indigenous people to find these models that aren't more recolonizing models, to find models that work better with our collective identity, that work better with our kaupapa of aroha for all of Papatūānuku, for all of her tamariki. And I think, Whaia, Shirley, you summed up some of the important points really well. But the other thing is, if this is really about the restoration of the mana of the whenua, then think about what the impact is of what's under the soil as well, and the why. And we already know that the foe has experienced terrible trauma. Thinking further afield about the pest plants in the Waitakere forest, go and take the moth plant out if you want to do, you know, for me personally, why attack these beautiful trees that are home to these beautiful manu and these beautiful ngangara, and some of them that they've created an ecosystem up there for themselves now, when there's so much other work that we could do to restore the mana of the whenua. Koina. Mariora.
Thank you. Thank you. And so much other work to do to support Māori. So much other work to do to deeply tend the Indigenous people of this land who need support, rather than taking away their green spaces. And so, Shirley, just coming back to you, thank you for allowing that little segue. Is there anything else you want to add to your share and your experience?
Yes, just mainly that my community is predominantly Māori and Pacific Island people, and the mountain is very important to them, because we're actually a low socioeconomic area out here, quite different to Mount Talbot and Wairaka. We're also, under the Unitary Plan, a high intensification area. So we've got lots and lots of building going on here, terrace housing. Just one street created housing for a couple of thousand people, actually just one development in Panama Road. So I understand that the school had great difficulty catering to all the new children last year. But also, I would like to talk about COVID and how our lives have changed. And I'm not quite sure what day we're up to now in the lockdown. Do you know, Samar, what day we're in?
I mean, it's mid-70s for sure.
Yeah, it's an awful long time. But during this time, the only things that we've been able to do is to go shopping, or to go to our park or reserve for a walk. So bearing this in mind, and the possibility that the situation's actually going to go on for you know, a long time perhaps, I would like to ask ngā mana whenua o Tamaki Makaurau and Te Punamanga Authority to please start thinking more about the well-being of the people who live here in Tamaki Makaurau. And to rethink your plans, please, and stop being in such a hurry, because there's plenty of time to make your dream come true. And we do support this planting of native, but I also do think it's a very dangerous time to try and put everything into one basket, because we've already got kori dieback and other diseases and exotic trees as well. So we need every single tree we've got. I know that it's not just you people that are chopping trees down. I know that it's happening everywhere. On private land, developers, roading, AT, everyone's doing it. But it's just gone nuts in Auckland. And at least just give us some peace in our parks and reserves. Stop the park grab, stop the land grab, and stop chopping down our trees, please, in those green spaces. Create some more green spaces for us. Don't take them away.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. We had promised that there would be time for questions at the end, if possible, and there are a few minutes. And I just want to ask the most brief question, inspired by what you just said, Shirley, about land grab. So there's the whole land back movement around the world, and you said something a couple days ago about why this isn't how it looks. Do you want to elucidate on that really briefly?
I don't want to jump in front of Whaia Shirley, because that was actually her point. So, ke a koe Whaia, or do you want me to kōrero?
She's pointing at you.
Oh, okay, thank you.
Go for it, Yo.
So, yeah, it's absolutely noticeable. And I don't know if you can see behind me the background that I selected for tonight, because I can't see myself, thankfully. I did that deliberately. So that is a view from the Sky Tower across to Wairaka. And the shadow that you can see just behind me, that's all Wairaka. Now, you can see the green spaces that are there. I unfortunately couldn't get a 10-year later shot, because that was 10 years ago. But you would be surprised if you were to see now how much of our green spaces have gone. And this is the time of, I mean, if anybody who doesn't understand that we really are in extreme crisis, the planet is in crisis, this is a time when we do need to put aside. What I've said is we cannot continue to violate Papatuanuku. We cannot continue to hold a humanist view of the world as being here to support our own agenda and fulfill our own desires, whether they be for cultural restoration, power, economic growth, mana whenua tanga, or any tanga that we promote. I understand there is a decolonizing narrative that has been promoted in the positioning of certain council-appointed authorities, but I want to restate that I stand for the mana of the whenua. I stand for the sovereignty of Papatuanuku. Now, I can see great potential in the idea that we're looking at it from more culturally inspired landscapes, even to do with housing. That must mean that we're taking care of Papatuanuku. It must mean that as well. Mauri ora.
Thank you. Thank you both. So a couple of questions here from Jessica. It says, you mentioned that the Maunga and the Manu being the kaitiaki and not humans. Did I hear that correctly? I think, Shirley, you spoke to that. Do you want to say a bit more?
Yes. In Mātauranga Māori, we believe that our ancestors come back reincarnated, often as birds or other things that are non-human. So Māori role is kaitiaki tanga, the doing bit, but the kaitiaki is actually the mountain, the forest, the waters, things that are not human. But that's just part of many narratives that our young corporate Māori seem to be inventing. And that makes me cross, because I like who I am. I've always been proud of being Māori, and I don't want my identity changed. And I don't want my culture desecrated, actually, by younger people deciding now that we differentiate between native and exotic, and that it's okay to chop down perfectly healthy, very old trees. On our mountains, some of them are over 100 years old, just because they're not native, because that's not us, that's not who we are as Māori people.
Thank you. And there's some beautiful comments from all people you love and know. Mariana, thank you for your comments. She's speaking to both of you and saying you may not see it now, but believe me, your advocacy and legacy and voice will be heard. And so,
thank you, Mariana.
And lots of love being sent from Nicole and Jessica and others. And so we're right 2 minutes before closing. This would be a beautiful time to hand it to both of you for any closing prayers, any karakia, anything you want to do to honor this time.
Yo, do you want to speak? I'm going to close with the finishing prayer. We started with the what we call our karakia timatanga, and so I will finish with our closing prayer. Kia tau, kia tātou katoa, te ata whai o tō tātou ariki, ai hu karaiti, me te aroha o te atua, me te whiwhinga tahitanga, ki te wairua tapu, aki aki, amini. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming tonight. I appreciate you giving us your time, and please spread the word. And we'll see you again soon, maybe for a second round. Pō mari e, everyone.
Pō mari e te whānau, ti hei moriora.